Okay, I think we're good to go.
Hi everyone, my name's Katrina Santos. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I work at Columbus State. Oh, are we all?
Yeah. Hey, no, yeah, we'll do it. Hey, that works. So I'm Allie Upchurch. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I work at Capital University, but fun fact, Katrina, I'm actually making a transition over to Columbus State here.
Really?
Yeah, the beginning of December. So that would be cool.
We should
Yes, we could. But yeah, excited to talk about this book. So.
Yeah, and I'm Tyler White. My pronouns are he, him, his. I work at Ohio University, and I really enjoyed this read, so I'm excited to talk about it.
Definitely. It definitely was it was very raw and real, very powerful book. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess I'll get started. I know we talked about that there's a lot of different components of like the intersectionality of Janet Mock's story, right? That a lot of different theories we're able to implement into the read, right? One of the things I'll talk about is privilege. In the book, Janet Mock was very talked about how the fluidity of her identity and how that impacted her in different stages of her life. For example, when she was getting her gender affirmation change and the identity of living in poverty, about the existential action she had to take to get the money to get those gender affirmation changes was very harsh, right? So that component of the sense of privilegedness in the trans community was very apparent in the book. So, for example, she talked about in the first part of the book, it was like her present self, right? Like her being an adult, her already being a writer, already her having her gender affirmation change and kind of having that pass, right? She talked about the concept of privilegedness and of being in the trans community, where that she recognized this was not just a single story among everybody, because at that moment of where she is now, she is able to pass in the community based off societal acceptance, and which is not the case for people who cannot afford for gender affirmation changes, which is very hard on people's lives. And I thought that was very powerful and real, because that story, the identity of being the trans identity, there's a lot of intersectional experiences among that. Another thing that I saw as well was that we talked about the concept of the multiple dimensions of identity, or in another, very similar to the intersectional theory. The book goes in depth of her experience of growing up with trauma. I mean, from sexual abuse to having a broken home, the impact of living in poverty, also being the identity of being being Black, the absence of her mother, the absence of her father when she lived with her mother, a lot of the different roles that impacted her in her development as a child. Definitely was very strong components in the book.
Yeah, no, I agree.
One of the things that came up for me, actually thinking back to writing the theory into practice for last week about critical consciousness, it talked about how being able to reflect on your experiences can be such a crucial aspect to your life, and really delving deeper into reflecting how your different identities intersect. So there are so many different identities at play: race, ethnicity, social class, sexuality, gender. I mean, it's where all of these places meet for Janet. I mean, in her journey to where she goes, it really,
absolutely,
it was such a more, very rich story to see her development through that, and to see her kind of coming to terms with all of it.
Yeah.
You mentioned the relationship with mother and father. I mean, always kind of yearning for the approval of both, and knowing that there really wasn't I don't know, the opportunity for that familial connection. Like, her mother respected her and gave her that space to operate. But always kind of feeling like she was fighting, even that familial aspect. Just seeing how she was able to interpret all of this on her path was really enthralling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things that was interesting too, and I had never thought of this prior, is, Katrina, you were talking about like the privilege. I have the privilege of not experiencing the journey that Janet had to go through. And she also talks about like her sexual identity is very different than her gender identity. And and in my mind, I associated those two as being the same. And as she was talking about, being a young woman growing up in the community that she grew up in, the resources were not there for a lot of those individuals who were, and I know she talked a lot about, I think Wendy was like there for her, and she was able to see somebody like as a role model. And I think that a lot of they don't have that. They don't have somebody in their life to where they really see a reflection of who they want to be. Also talks about like I think of like the, I guess, theory of like looking at a mother and how you resemble your mother, and how your mother is this being or figure in your mind. And I think Janet really struggled with that as she was encountering her own identity, because she'd idolized her mother for so long and tried to make excuses for her mother and the relationship with Rick. And it just really was unfolding a lot through her own self, I guess, sexual identity as well. I think she came to terms in terms of like her gender identity. She had identified as a girl when her family identified her as a girl. But that social identity also like comes to play too. There's a lot of conflict.
I agree with you, Allie. I definitely, I feel like there's so much power in representation, and you could see throughout Janet's story where she saw that representation, like when she moved to Texas. Because at first, when she lived in Oakland, it was like she was just hiding like her identity because of fear, right? She didn't really have like a role model that was a woman in her life at the time that she looked up to. And then when she moved to Texas with her dad's family, she saw that like that was like her first real representation of what she wanted to be, right? And then with Wendy as well, like the power of representation, having someone that you can see yourself in and relate to is so powerful. Actually, like I know we talked about Baxter's goal to authorship, like back earlier in the class. I feel like that really, if we put that concept into the story, that power of representation really empowered her over time to really gain her voice. Like if we think about the first phase of it, like the following formulas phase, I think of that as the Oakland part of her life, where she kind of was just like following out of fear of what society told her to do, right? Like you are a boy, do boy things. Like her dad was very like, I need you to be a roughhouse and go down this bike and stuff like that. And then over time, through representation and as she grew older, I mean, there's multiple parts playing here. She's able to go through these phases where she ends up writing a whole book, right? So I feel like there's a lot of things in play. I agree with you a lot. I'm glad that you brought up representation being such an important part of her life.
I thought it was really interesting as well that the first real taste of representation she saw in adults were drag queens, people that weren't living as, out, trying to remember the actual phrasing she used throughout the book, but weren't living that every day. They could go out or, represented differently, in their day-to-day lives. So even that first chance was only kind of like a half measure for her, to truly see somebody. It took until meeting Wendy and learning about, what was the... I wrote the phrase down.
Yeah, I think it was
Mahu.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
yes, and learning about that and that aspect, and then meeting, the people on Merchant Street,
Mhm.
and having that negative,
Mhm.
I guess not, maybe not negative is the right word to use, but having that influence, the sex industry, and then
Yeah.
a lot of that first real sense of power coming through selling her body.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
that's where like I mentioned this before we kind of got in, but the unifying like model of sexual like development or sexual identity development, where that social identity. So she talks about, I think her name was Allison, or the woman that she was talking with. Um,
Sorry.
how no, you're fine. So how she was embarrassed to talk about what she was doing on Merchant Street, and how
And
even
she
though
just was
that would
hanging
like,
out.
yeah, she was like hiding all of this. She didn't want to be judged by her, but her end goal was to get the funds to, I guess, send her, like to make her pass essentially. And
Yeah.
that was so interesting to me in terms of she was bearing her whole entire life to like this woman that was helping her through not only her sexual identity, her gender identity, and then she's hiding a huge part of her life in terms of what the end goal was and how she was getting there. And so I think that the model does a great job at showing kind of the three areas that are really playing with one another. So biopsychological processes,
Yeah.
the sexual identity development, and then the individual identity and the social identity. I think that in that moment where she was on Merchant Street, she was working, her individual identity represented something so different than her social identity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it has all these dimensions, and it was interesting to read, though, coming from her perspective, because when there was a moment where she talked about, I think it was it Corey or Jeff or one of her brothers, and how they were like on the floor and something had happened, and I was so taken back at how descriptive her trauma and how that really, and then she said, this does not, like, I don't identify with, this is not where my femininity comes from, this is a part of me. And it's so clear in that moment. First, I like had to take a second because it was super powerful that she was able to articulate something that had really changed her life, but able to turn that into, I'm not making excuses for myself, this is my journey, but this is something that happened to me. But I liked learning a little bit more about that sexual identity development in terms of those statuses, because I think it helped create some context for me, at least, to see that she was really truly living so many different lives. And in her mind, until she got that procedure done, she didn't really merge a lot of her lives until that happened, even though she knew it was with her at all time. Like her genitalia didn't like that didn't change her, that didn't make her a woman. She was already a woman to begin with. So
Yeah.
powerful that she could articulate that.
Yeah, I definitely regarding, I believe it's Love's model.
Okay.
It would in gender identity, the components of the fact that sex, gender roles, gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation do not equal each other. Like that concept of that not equaling each other, but being related in some ways is very powerful in the book, because her gender identity was always female, right? She was always a woman, right? But her gender expression has evolved throughout the book in stages of her life. In the concept of, like, in the beginning, I remember there was a part in the book when she was in Texas where her dad was like, her identity as Keisha.
Yeah.
And there was that boy over the summer, and he was like, "Where's Keisha?" And then her dad was like, "Are you gay?"
Yeah.
And she was just silent, but she knew she wasn't gay. Like her sexual orientation wasn't gay. She was a woman that was straight, that was attracted to men. And I felt like the way that Janet articulates her story, it was very powerful in showing how these, you know, these 5 concepts don't equal each other, but they're related in ways.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it goes back to representation as well. I mean, she talks about how, you know, when she comes out to her mom, how she wishes she would have like known the phrasing of trans, or wish she could have.
Like having the verbiage.
I mean, it just goes to show, you know, you'll hear people arguing about the, you know, the acronym used to describe the community and how it's becoming an alphabet soup. But that alphabet soup is important because those different letters represent different people, and having the strength and the ability to put it to a name, to put words to it, can help to share their stories. So
Right.
it's important to have those there.
Yeah. And Katrina, you brought up in terms of, I think, Keisha, when she was kind of present in part of the book during her life, I thought about the Marcia's ego of identity status in terms of that like exploration phase, and how she was so concerned with like her parental authority and that being an approval point. And I think throughout the book, she really struggled with that. That was something that I think was like not a chip on her shoulder, but really following her in all aspects of her life. And then, you know, after she had gone across the seas to get her surgery, you know, her mom was there, and her brothers were there, and like, mom just sobbed. And the fact that like you could tell that was with her. And so I know that it talked about like what falls short, the like theoretical perspectives. I feel like that was one thing that I thought that she always had with her, but then that moment when she landed, that wasn't really what her mom saw her as. You know, her mom had always seen her as a woman, and then even the letter that she wrote to her dad, you know, it sounded a little snarky, but then like he also like sent something back kind of snarky. But in terms of like, she didn't really give her dad a chance. You know, she was already under the, you know, pretenses of my dad won't accept me. This is something that like I'm going to struggle with. But she never really had the opportunity to have a conversation with him to say, do you accept me? I'm a woman. And he just wasn't informed about sexual identity, because he was like, well, are you gay? And she's like, no. So I think instead of taking that time to really educate her father about who he was as a person, she held on to this resentment about him, and then idolized her mother, who truly didn't treat her the best. So it was just interesting to kind of see those two stories.
Yeah.
So, okay, so I think I know we're running a little bit on time, but I want to look back and see if maybe there are some questions that we can maybe ask each other to kind of get a better idea of kind of what we were thinking about, and maybe elaborate a little bit more. I just want to pull back open this post, so just bear with me, y'all, just to make sure that we're covering, because I think it's just like how everything that we kind of talked about, how do those like intersect with one another? I know that we chatted a little bit about that, but I just want to maybe think about a little bit of like maybe some questions that we had in terms of leaving the book, and maybe where some of the theories like fell short for us. I don't know if you encountered any of that while reading through. Because I mean, I could see a little bit of it, but I also could see, you know, you mentioned Baxter's self-authorship, and it takes me back to when we were watching
Black Panther.
Yeah, Black Panther, and I was like, there's so many similarities too in that journey, and even for like when I'm talking about Wakanda now, but like even in that moment where oh gosh, what's the main character's name?
T'Challa.
Panther. Yeah, T'Challa. How he like becomes king, but like, it still doesn't make him like whole. It's still something that like he's still journeying through. And I feel that very same way with Janet. Like I feel like she's still discovering herself with this new identity. Relationship.
And even like in the beginning, even though it was like more present, like I forget who her late husband, I know they're divorced now, but like her late husband, just like she was in a more developed time of her life, right? Being a trans woman. She just got that article posted about her, about who she is. But the struggle of it, her, like, it's always a constant journey, right? Like, it's, no one's ever completely full of who they are. It's always some part of them is still developing. Like, when she was talking about, like, you know, just telling the truth to her partner about her gender identity. And I think that that being in the present time, like, seeing how that has evolved, is just like that constant notion of, like, having these certain identities, you're always going to, there's things that you're always going to be facing, right? And like that notion of intersectionality, how fluid it is and how it changes. Like, at first, like, on the appearance wise, like, her intersectionality was, as a from societal view, she was a Black boy living in poverty in Oakland with a single dad who was addicted to crack. Like, you know what I mean? There was all these different intersecting models who of in trauma that she was experiencing. But that next layer of, like, do I want to go to that level of being a Black trans woman? And like, if we look at, like, societal and, like, just by like statistics, like, Black trans women are the most vulnerable. And, you know, so many, like, women, Black trans women, have died by just being who they are, right? So we see that notion of, like, how her identity has evolved over time in the book, and how scary it was for her, right? Like, how I'm a Black man, right? I was in society's, I'm a Black boy, right? Like, and am I ready for, you know, the challenges and the acceptance that, you know, the non-acceptance of it that comes with society, by being my true self, like the courage to do that, and everything that comes with it. Like, I know she really talked about that, and that was so powerful, because it really highlighted the challenges of transition.
Well, it even talked, like, within the community, how there were, you know, two different, you know, there were passing, and then there were, you know, not passing. You know, they accused her of being fish, I think is what the phrase that they used. And, like, how, you know, even within a community of trans women, she was still ostracized because she was able to pass. And I mean, and that just adds even more to her, you know, the intimacy issues of her fear of getting close to someone. I mean, because she's so easy to pass, that at some point, you know, she always feels like she's kind of got this bombshell ready to drop. I mean, that's got to be an anxious way to live, you know, the fear that at any point, you know, you could be accused with that or confronted with it. And I mean, it goes a long way to say, because I mean, you know, every time she talks about disclosure and you know, the things that go through her mind, she always mentions safety. You know, safety is always mentioned as one of the major factors in determining that. It's just, to interact in everyday life, to have to think like that, it can only be, I mean, I can only imagine.
Yeah. And I like tabbed a couple of pages, but one of the pages I tabbed was 118, and it talked about how, like, it says, to make matters worse, these support spaces often only address sexual orientation rather than a young person's gender identity. And like I said in the beginning, you know, that was something that, like, and I always try to apply what I'm doing or what I'm learning here into, like, what my practice will look like moving forward in the future and working with, you know, college age students. And will I ever be in a situation where I misunderstand, or, like, I don't take the opportunity to really fully talk to the students or talk to the individual about what they're truly going through, and then I don't understand the journey that they're on because I'm not informed or I'm not educated about, like, the difference of sexual identity and gender identity. And so I think in hearing it from her own words, that was also nice too, because I feel like you're hearing it firsthand from someone who had experienced it, and then you then can develop, I don't want to say, like, empathy, but you have a better and deeper understanding of what they have gone through. And it just, like, takes you back a little bit to see that someone's life. and this was happening. So, okay, I'm getting a thing that says running out of time. So I think we are about to wrap it up a little bit, but I don't know if you two have any other things you would like to say.
Katrina, do you have any? I'll offer you first.
Yeah, I thought that was really deep. Like, I feel like just in our work in higher ed, like, we're obviously in this master's for a reason, right? And what you asked is, it's so true. Like, I work in the diversity department right now in Columbus State, and like, it's always a constant journey of learning. And there's times where I accidentally misgender someone, and I just correct myself, where I don't use, you know, gender conforming language. But it's that constant journey of forgiveness, and then also just having that eagerness to keep learning, for inclusion, and to really see someone as their whole person. And I feel like students, as that has happened to me, that they respect that. You know, they're like, look, like, you know, I own up and I apologize, and then I continue and move on and do better next time. And I think that the answer to your question is just practice, right? Like, continuous practice and continuous working on the knowledge part of it, as well as what you're already doing right now, which is I feel like it's an ongoing process every day.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That is true.
I really enjoyed the read. I mean, you know, as a higher ed practitioner, you know, I'm a straight white male. My experience is very different from a lot of the people that I work with. So it was really interesting to be able to read this. And, you know, I've got some people close in my life who have recently started the transition process. So it was interesting to be able to kind of get this read and to be able to kind of just start to understand what they might be going through. And I'll share really quick an anecdote. I was actually at a conference last year where we were talking about LGBTQIA inclusion in the admissions process. And one student, they had asked a question as to why there wasn't an option for us to communicate with them on their gender area, you know, for them to truly choose their pronoun. And somebody brought up, once again, the safety aspect of, you know, we want to honor you and who you are, but we also don't want to put you in an unsafe environment by sending a letter to your preferred name and pronoun, and then having the wrong person at home open it. And it's just, I guess with more books like this coming out, with more people, it can only get better. And I hope that's the case.
Right. Yeah. Awareness is key, and figuring out how to educate ourselves and educate the community around us, I think is good in moving forward. Really.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Great. Okay. Well, this was, I think, productive.
Yeah. It was a really great conversation.
Yeah, it was good. So I'll go ahead and upload it, and hopefully we'll get some discussions from it. So, all right. Awesome.
Bye.
It was nice meeting you both.
Yes, you too.